Thanks, Colin. Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the big debate, which this week comes from Newco Patrick Church. In Bearsden, we'll be talking about, among other things, some of the tax changes in the budget this week. We'll be talking about the proposed sugar levy, and we'll be discussing whether the barriers to people from poorer families should be lowered if they try to go to university. All that after a summary of the news.
Good afternoon. A man has been arrested near a Glasgow private school after he was seen carrying 2 machetes. Eyewitnesses said the man was wearing a balaclava and was running back and forth by St Aloysius College in the city centre at about 8:30 this morning. One police officer was slightly injured. There were reports the man threatened a lollipop man and tried to attack a janitor at the Glasgow School of Art. There's confusion over the future of the UK government's plans to cut some people's disability benefits. The UK Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, says it's just a suggestion at the moment after some Conservative MPs called for the Chancellor to reconsider the idea. But a source told the BBC there are no changes planned to the budget proposal. Kaz Aston is a disability campaigner who has MS.
Sometimes people are so ill they haven't got the energy to fight. They haven't got the energy to keep saying, well, no, that's not right. You know, I need some extra support. And there is in some places a lot of support, particularly from charities. But when it comes to finances and money, people quite often are on their own.
The Scottish Labour leader has insisted there is no problem in Jeremy Corbyn not attending the party's Scottish conference. The UK leaders of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats have both addressed their Scottish conferences in recent weeks. Kezia Dugdale will be leading her party's one-day conference at the Glasgow Science Centre tomorrow. Ms Dugdale said that she, rather than Labour's UK leader Mr Corbyn, was in charge north of the border.
He didn't need an invite and he didn't decline to come. This is the last Scottish Labour Party conference before the elections. I'm the leader of the party. I lead an autonomous Scottish Labour Party. I'm in charge. I work very closely with Jeremy Corbyn. We are good friends, but he doesn't need to be there to offer support to me or indeed to the Scottish Labour campaign.
The Turkish President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, says Europe needs to look at its own record on migrants before telling Turkey what to do. His comments come as EU leaders meet the Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu in Brussels to try to finalise a deal aimed at ending the European migration crisis. The Unite Union has claimed fuel supplies to forecourts in Scotland and the north of England could be hit by a strike by dockers at the port of Grangemouth. More than 70 port workers began a 2-week strike on Tuesday after voting for action in a row over shift patterns. Unite claimed tanker drivers were refusing to cross picket lines. Port owners Forth Ports said only container key ship operations had been affected by the action. Groups representing victims of infected blood products have welcomed the Scottish Government's decision to give them increased financial support. The Scottish Infected Blood Forum said the Government was providing some form of justice. Those infected with hepatitis C will now get £27,000 a year. Those infected with HIV as well will receive £37,000. But the SIBF remained critical of the failure to help most victims who don't currently qualify for annual payments. That's the news. Now sports with Jonathan Sutherland.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Scotland's record point scorer Chris Patterson says securing a third consecutive Six Nations victory is a big ask this weekend. Scotland play their final Six Nations match away to Ireland tomorrow. Patterson thinks the match could come down to 2 or 3 points either way. The football and the Premiership match between Motherwell and Aberdeen tomorrow is on. There were doubts over the fixture after a flu-like virus swept through the Motherwell side, but this morning the club have tweeted that enough players have reported for training. The Champions League quarter-final draw has been made. Manchester City will play Paris Saint-Germain. Holders Barcelona take on Atletico Madrid. Real Madrid will play the German side Wolfsburg, and Bayern Munich take on Benfica. And Manchester United and Liverpool have both been charged by UEFA following crowd trouble during the Europa League match at Old Trafford last night. Rival fans were seen fighting in the stands. There were also seats thrown and flares lit. Liverpool won the match 3-1 on aggregate. More sport from me in an hour's time. The travel right now comes from Teresa Talbot.
In Guardbridge, delays on the A91 Cooper Road in both directions, just at Main Street through the roadworks area. M8 Glasgow, an accident approaching the Kingston Bridge is blocking one lane westbound. So it's causing delays back to Junction 15 Townhead. And drivers slowing down for a look, causing eastbound delays here, so very slow moving from around Charing Cross back toward 22 Plantation. The A75 Crocketford to Castle Douglas Road, delays in both directions, again because of roadworks at Ramhill Bridge. And a reminder that from Sunday, Glasgow Glasgow's Queen Street Tunnel closes. It's closed until the 8th of August, so it will cause disruption to certain services. Full details on scotrail.co.uk/Queen Street Tunnel. And that's BBC Radio Scotland Travel.
Scotland's weather, a mainly dry but cloudy afternoon. We'll see some breaks in the cloud at times and even spells of sunshine. The best of the sunshine will be across Lochaber, North Argyll and the Central Highlands, also over the southwest. Here temperatures will reach around 15 Celsius, but it's feeling much cooler under the cloud at 8 or 9 Celsius, and winds will be light. That's the news for now. Now it's back to Gordon.
92 to 95 FM, 810 medium wave, and on digital radio. BBC Radio Scotland.
Thanks for that. I'm Gordon Brewer. Welcome back to the big debate from Bears Den. Now, the name Bears Den turns out to be somewhat mysterious. It doesn't mean that lots of Rangers supporters live here, though I dare say they do. But neither does it mean there were ever any bears here. No one's quite sure what it means, but they think it might come from bear or bar, a Gaelic word meaning barley, and that grew up the glen. So, in fact, this place isn't nearly as dangerous as you might think it is. So our panel today can rest assured that they are safe. They are the culture spokesman, person for the Scottish Greens, Zara Kitson, the SNP MSP Gil Patterson, Labour MSP Drew Smith, from the Conservatives Kyle Thornton, a former chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and the trade union lawyer Patrick McGuire. Let's get our first question, shall we? It comes from Kirsty, who's a student from Bearsden Academy. Kirsty.
As George Osborne has just announced further cuts to disability allowance, are we in danger of becoming a less civilised society by penalising the vulnerable?
What penalising? This Drew Smith is a reference. There's a growing row, isn't there, going on? It's really blown up over the last 24 hours that not only some in your party, but some Conservative MPs are not very happy about the changes to the personal independence payments which are being made.
Well, I think obviously the budget process is ongoing. I think there's a slight misinformation.
Sorry, I should point out, I said Kill. This is, in fact, Kyle Thornton.
Yeah, I think, there are some, different facts that, need to be there. Firstly, this wasn't originally part of the budget itself. It was actually a reform process of the personal independence payment that's coming through. And I think it needs to be made clear that those who cannot work in any way, shape or form and are receiving PIP will not have anything taken off them. And the budget for those with disabilities is still rising, and I think that's important to note. However... But
I think there were, when you say it wasn't part of the budget, Nicky Mordeman seemed to suggest last night on Question Time that, it was still up for grabs. But as I understand it, something like £4 billion is written into the budget Red Book figures, so that these savings will be made.
Yeah, well, it is a significant budget. It's around £60 billion, so obviously the Chancellor does need to account. I think what I would say, in my own personal opinion, is, I think we need to, continue to look at these changes to make sure they're fair. I am, like many Conservatives, I'm not pro, welfare here, there and everywhere, but actually I think we do have a duty to look after those who cannot look after themselves. And actually, particularly when those who are affected are those who are deemed able to do some sort of work, and actually a lot of Conservatives want to see those who can work supported into the workplace. So I think, we need to save money, we need to make sure that the numbers add up, but I would hope the Chancellor might look again at how we can better support disabled people, through the personal independence payment.
Right, that was Kyle Thornton of the Conservatives impersonating Drew Smith of Labour. This is Drew Smith of Labour. Who do you want to be?
Well,
are you going to be yourself?
I'm going to be myself, Gordon, but what I wanted to do was ask the question that was asked of, does penalising disabled people make us a less civilised society? And I think the answer to that question is yes, it does. And I think I think a lot of people are very confused looking at this budget, where Chancellor has managed to find money to support those people with some of the most resources in society through the changes he's making to the tax system, at exactly the same time that he's threatening this cut on disabled people. And what I suppose I find it bizarre, the idea that something that was announced in the budget speech is then dismissed later on by members of the Cabinet as just a suggestion. Well, if it is just a suggestion...
So I should make the point that since then other members of the Cabinet have said No, it's not.
Well, I mean, I suppose on one level I would welcome the confusion, because I hope that might mean that we've got some chance of turning this around, because I think it's the wrong change. But the point I wanted to make about it being a suggestion is that every time these cuts are threatened and when they're introduced, they cause enormous stress on people who have to have their level of benefit assessed again and again. And regardless of whether we're finally able to defeat this cut or not, that's the reality for disabled people listening to the budget this week and thinking about their finances this week. It's yet another attack on them and more stress in their lives, wondering how am I going to make ends meet, and frankly asking the question, why am I to blame? Why is it that whenever time this Chancellor gets his forecasting wrong, he still is able to find money for those with the most and targets yet again those with least? So I think the answer to the question is yes, it does make us a less civilised society if we go ahead with this.
Well, Gil Patterson, Drew Smith referred there to the tax changes. The SNP aren't very keen on some of them, are you?
Do I not get a choice to see who I would like to be?
Oh, sorry, don't let me stop you.
Well, I'd love to be George Osborne, because it would reverse everything he's ever brought to the table, to be quite frank with you. But before I answer that question, which is legitimate, I would like to make a point on this proposal from the Tories. Here we are, that they're proposing for the richest people a 10% cut, and yet they've got this on the table to tackle something that doesn't exist, problems with people with disabilities. And in Scotland, it's 40,000 people that are affected by this, and it'll be £3,000 a year for people that don't really have much. And the idea that this is even been thought about, and now they're retracting from that, I think the roof is beginning to collapse on them, how crass this actually is. And I do hope, I listened to a bulletin from your news agency earlier on, and I do hope that the people in the Conservative Party have the courage to stand up against this and it doesn't happen. So that's my starting point. Well, actually, the SNP do believe in utilising tax revenues to a better society. But what we don't believe in with the proposal from the Labour Party, that you bring in a tax where you have...
No, so I wasn't referring to Labour, I was referring to the budget. There is a proposal which to raise the threshold at which people start to pay the 40p rate of income tax.
Yeah, quite. This is UK, but this is the...
No, but Nicola Sturgeon seemed to imply the other day that would not be implemented in Scotland.
I was just about to say that what you're proposing is what the Chancellor has said for the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, the presiding officer, the First Minister said yesterday that we haven't actually concluded exactly what we're going to do, but she did make it very, very plain that what was proposed by George Osborne would not be proposed by her. There will be an announcement from the Scottish Government on...
And do you think she's right?
She's right, because she hasn't actually made any announcement yet.
No, I know.
So,
well, let's say she does.
It's above my pay grade to tell you what that might be.
What do you think, then? What do you think she should do?
Well, I think that, just as ever, that the people who have the broadest shoulders should carry the burden. And so, therefore, the idea that here in Scotland that we would take the opportunity to reduce tax from those who could have
and it doesn't concern you that better off people in Scotland would be paying more tax than they would in England?
No, I don't think so, because they won't be paying any more tax than they are at the present time. And the one thing I would say across society in Scotland, there is a general concept of taking care of people from across the parties. It's a slightly different. So I'm confident that people will react properly.
What do you make of the budget?
It's an outright attack on disabled people, on the most vulnerable in our society, and I think also on young people. And I'm glad to see a young person asking that question, because young people want to see a society where we are looking after each other and we have a base of social security, because that's what it is. It's not benefits and it's not welfare. It's social security, and that's what makes for a healthy and well society, and that's exactly what I believe the young people in Scotland and the rest of the UK want and are looking for from our governments, and unfortunately aren't getting it. The UK government's already been pulled through the coals for their appalling record on human rights and disabled rights, and found guilty of breaching human rights laws internationally. And I think that this is absolutely brazen that they can then come in with changes like this at a time where we should be protecting our most vulnerable and investing in young people and in disabled and the poor to close the gap in inequality and work towards a fairer society. That's the kind of reforms that we should be seeing that we're not seeing, and that I hope that we will see coming in when Scottish Parliament takes some more control over some of our benefits in the coming period through devolved powers coming our way.
All right. The gentleman there.
The original question spoke about looking after disabled and that. How does the answer given by Mr. Was it Thornton? How does that gel with someone being taken off benefits because he's too ill to travel far enough south to get a doctor to agree that he is too ill to work?
Okay, thank you for that. Was there someone at the back there?
What I was going to say is, do they think that disabled people and people that care for them have nothing better to do with their time than fill out long forums to justify, a little bit of state support?
Thank you for that. Because this is one of the issues, isn't it? Is that people are having to, in effect, reapply. At the front there, yes.
As I understand it, the Conservatives did a U-turn on the tax credits. I think it would be in George Osborne's interest to actually come a little bit further and just say, look, I've made a mistake on this one. I'm just going to not go forward with it. I think that's the way it should be.
Okay, Patrick McGuire, look, there is another side to this, isn't there? That almost anything you do to reform the welfare system, someone's going to lose. So the other side of that is then nothing ever happens because everyone's scared to do anything because someone's going to lose out.
Well, that may be the case, but let's just look at what George Osborne himself said. He described this as a budget for small businesses. That's simply not the case. This was a budget for the wealthy at the expense of the poor and most vulnerable people in society. It's that plain and it's that simple. And in that context, what was done with disability benefits is the most glaring and obvious example of that. It's noxious, it's malodorous, and it's plain and simply wrong. There was handouts to businesses big and small. There was an increase in the higher threshold for higher rate tax. They increased the personal allowance. Now, of course, we have to bear in mind that is presented as something that benefits people who are less well off. The reality is that an increase in personal allowance most benefits proportionately the well off. There are better, there are more intelligent, there are more articulate ways of helping out poorer people with tax cuts, and it's certainly not that. What we have here is a situation, the gentleman at the front is absolutely right. Flip-flop Osborne flip-flopped over tax credits, where there was going to be a big announcement about pensions. That's gone. Will he flip-flop in this again? I hope so, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, Kyle Thornton, various things have addressed to you, so I think you should have a chance to come back on that.
Yeah, well, I think, George Osborne's budget, I absolutely reject this idea that somehow it was only for the well-off. The personal allowance itself is for those who earn over £11,500 a year, will now keep more than they earn. Now, if you think someone who earns £11,500 is well off, then by all means that's your opinion. But George Osborne cut taxes for 31 million people. That is not, unless we have 31 million people who are extremely well off in this country.
But on the other issue, what people were referring to was the raising of the threshold at which you start to pay 40p. Is that something that the Scottish Conservatives would like to see applied in Scotland?
Well, actually, what we want to do is, the reason why George Osborne has proposed that second one is there's people who, at a certain point, around 41,000, go suddenly from 20% to 40% in the amount of tax they pay. Now, actually, our solution is, we actually think that a 30% tax rate to minimise that, massive jump that happens in people's income, would actually be a fairer way of doing it. But actually, George Osborne promised in the Conservative manifesto. He was elected into government, and he's putting into government what he was elected to do in his manifesto.
That 30p you've referred to is not actually Scottish Conservative policy as yet, is it?
It was proposed by our Independent Tax Commission.
But it's not actually policy.
And we're looking at how we can best implement it. But there are ideas and suggestions. And the difference is, unlike the SNP, we are actually willing to say, let's look at innovative ways to help people through the tax
Before we
system.
move on, Drew Smith, I'm curious because I don't know what Labour's policy would be in Scotland on whether the Scottish Government should implement the rise in the threshold for the 40p?
I think we have said that the opportunity of more tax powers allows us to make different decisions. And I think, actually, to be fair to the First Minister, when she was answering questions about the threshold yesterday, I think there may be an emerging consensus around this, that this is the wrong choice. I think the opportunity of having... I mean, if you think back, obviously these powers come through the latest Scotland Bill, but the original referendum that established our Scottish Parliament back in 1997 received public support for the idea that Scotland could vary tax rates. So I think that we should make decisions.
That's a very complicated way of saying you agree with Gil Patterson, right? Okay, can we hear from the lady at the front?
If George Osborne's looking to help people through the tax reforms, surely he should make at least the top 3% of biggest companies stop avoiding tax, because that could completely cover everything disabled people need, and we wouldn't have to make any cuts to them at all. So maybe that should be his focus.
All right, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to move on. We have another question about the budget, and it comes from another student at Bearsden Academy, Megan.
Now that George Osborne has decided to tax sugary drinks, does this not amount to another tax on the poor?
Taxing sugary drinks, is it a tax on the poor, Zara Kitson?
Absolutely. I think it is. I mean, kind of looking at it...
You think it is a tax on the poor?
I think it is a tax on the poor, yeah. And I think that if we're looking at reducing sugar uptake, if we're kind of connecting that to health, and having a healthier society by having reduced sugar, we need a tax that's actually not taxing the consumer directly, because that, in effect, is a tax on the poor, because largely...
But the sugar levy doesn't target the consumer directly. It's a tax on companies.
It's
I mean, the way it works is that if you are producing your sugary drinks,
yeah,
you'll
but
be
it's a
given
tax on, but
two
then,
years to get them with less sugar, and if the ones that aren't less sugar will pay the levy.
Yeah, but obviously the companies that make sugary things are then just going to pass that cost on to the consumer. Of course, then it's direct to the consumer. What we would prefer to see, if we're looking at a tax like this, is a sugar levy on supermarkets. And I think it links back to a wider agenda around our food policy, because we've left our food policy up to the supermarkets and other big industries, and we don't have food security in this country, and we have a situation, unfortunately, where too many of our people in communities are relying on food banks and don't have access to fresh produce, so then they are relying on sugar-laden...
What do you say a tax in supermarkets?
They are then relying on
mean?
sugar-laden foods, and if they don't have access to fresh foods, then in effect, yes, I think that the answer is that it is a tax on the poor.
A sugar levy on the supermarket?
Yeah.
But how would that stop? How would that not be a tax on consumers when a sugar levy on the companies is?
So I think that it would need to be more focused on the kind of wider looking at the policy, because it's about access to food, and if that comes through supermarkets, and supermarkets have the kind of biggest responsibility for our food and how we access our food, then I think that we need to look at those options rather than a direct tax on consumers.
Well, Gil Patterson, do you think it's a tax on the poor?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, because I'm addicted to Iron Brew, I'm afraid. So,
other soft drinks are available.
Yeah, but no, it's a serious question. But you know, it's true. I ain't going to be dying of alcohol poisoning because I don't take it and I don't smoke. But I have one heck of a sweet tooth. But actually, I think it's a starting point. But where I think it's gone wrong is that he has restricted it to one area of food production, drinks. When, if he's going to do this, it is unfair on the drinks industry. Now, that's not to say that I don't support it. Actually, I do support it.
No, you can't support it, because you said in your last answer you wanted to be George Osborne and reverse everything he'd done.
No. He hasn't done this one yet, so... No, but, you know, we really need to tackle health issues when it comes to food production and drinks. And I do think that by taxing a drink in this way, it will have the effect that's to reduce the consumption of that. But it is grossly unfair that one side of the production and the largest slice of where effect bad effects on people, it's through the food industry. It's so wide. Almost everything you touch, from bread to cereals, everything you touch has got sugar in it. And, if it's going to do it, it should do it right, and it shouldn't just tackle one part of it.
Okay.
And I would like to see that corrected.
Drew Smith, what do you make of this?
I'm supportive of the sugar tax overall, but to pick up on some of what Zara said, I think it is true to say that there is a regressive element to that, but that's primarily because ill health is regressive. People for whom obesity might be one of the factors in their ill health, and consumption of sugar might be one of the factors in their obesity, but it is only one. It's also about
what the soft drinks companies say. They say this is unfair. We're making efforts to get sugar levels down, and why should we be taxed when people can just go and pick up a candy bar and eat that, and it'll be just as bad?
Well, I think there are legitimate arguments about behaviour change, but they apply to everyone. And I suppose my answer to some of these food companies and the ones that are high intensive in their use of sugar is I don't see a lot of evidence of the behaviour change from those companies. They do need to be regulated, and if the way to get them to change their behaviour in terms of the products that they are marketing to the public is through the tax system, then I can welcome that, as long as it's part of an overall approach that actually supports people and understands that when people are time poor, when they are less likely to take exercise, when they have other challenges in their lives, that it shouldn't just be about behaviour change from that group of people and asking them to pay more all the time. As a society, we need to invest in the range of things that supports them to live healthier lives. And if asking, the sugar companies who produce sugar, high sugar products, to pay more as part of that, then I can go along with that, as long as it's
Although
part of
we should make the point, the idea is not actually for this tax to work. The idea is for this tax not to work, because the idea is that the sugar's taken out of the drinks and they don't have to pay the levy.
Over the long term, but you should also want to see improvements in people's health, which reduce the costs.
The young man at the front there.
With this whole sugary drinks tax thing, do you think that for people to get their sugary fix, that they will instead go to more sugary foods, and that is actually going to be a little bit counterintuitive for health reasons?
Okay, and there was someone else up the back there.
Do you not think that, like sugary drinks like your Coca-Cola and your Iron Brew and all that, do you not think that the companies are just going to take the sugar out of it and then put it into something else and call it something different, and then give it out to people and pass it up under a different name? Because think about Diet Coke and all that. That's actually worse for you and more addicting than actual Coca-Cola. But they're not getting a tax on that. They're not getting, obesity problems with that. It's bad for your health, but it's not bad for,
all right. Okay. I should say that as the BBC, we don't necessarily endorse chemical analysis of any particular soft drink. But Patrick McGuire, what do you think of this?
I actually was horrified when I was reading about this last night and preparing what I was thinking about going to say today, because it turns out a certain product that I won't mention the name of, but a fiery ginger beer, in fact, has more sugar than any other drink on the market. And I am, like Gill's addicted to Iron Brew, I'm addicted to this fiery ginger beer. So that was quite shocking for me. My money's going to go up. That's not to say that I'm against this policy in any way. I do agree with Gill as well that this, if it's going to apply, it should apply across all products. It shouldn't just be drinks, it should be all sugary
But what
products.
about Megan's point? Her point is it's a tax on the poor, and in fact if it applied to all sugary substances it would be even more of a tax on the poor, because it's like any tax. Any tax which puts up prices, poor people are going to have to pay relatively more.
Any form of indirect taxation could present issues like that. However, the reality is, as Drew commented, this is about regulating behaviour, and I personally have no problem with using indirect taxes for this. What we're really talking about here is, once again, the thing that everybody in Scotland agrees with, in stark contrast to England and Wales. We're a nation that absolutely agrees in progressive taxation and redistribution. So when we talk about the poor, the real issue isn't fizzy drinks or sugary foods. The issue is, when we get the powers shortly, using those powers to have a proper budget, not the one we saw yesterday, but one that would use progressive taxation to help the poor in that
that's a different
way.
issue.
That's what we should be doing.
Kyle Thornton, do you support George Osborne on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the aim of George Osborne is not to tax sugar completely on the whole. The aim is to is targeting sugary drinks, because that's been identified as a major factor in contributing to childhood obesity. And you're absolutely right when it's said the point is not to try and get people to pay this tax. The point is actually to encourage those who produce these drinks to lower the sugar content. You know, people have done it, companies have done it before, but it's at a very slow rate. So actually it's about reducing it, it's about, you know, trying to actually encourage industry to take a lead, because at the end of the day, you know, they want to be able to offer their products at the lowest price possible. So, you know, if we can encourage them to bring that sugar content down, then that's all for the good. And, you know, like has been said, it's a tax on industry, it's not a tax on consumers. And I think that's an incredibly important point to make in reference to the question.
Just before we move on, if we could get a microphone to Megan. Megan, I'm interested in what your answer to your own question is. Do you think it is a tax on the poor?
In certain cases, I'd say yeah, because that's the only option for some people, since fruit and veg isn't as available as other things. Maybe subsidising them might prove more effective than the sugar tax.
All right, Luke, thank you very much for that. Now, our next question comes from Alan Carroll.
Thank you. Is reducing university entrance requirements for applicants from disadvantaged backgrounds a good idea?
No, you presumably are referring to, there was a report came out this week,
I think
which
it was
said...
St Andrews University did a report.
For the Scottish Government. It's not actually government policy, we should point out, but the government is considering it. But this is the idea that if you come from a poor family, the entrance requirements for university should be different.
I think some of the thinking behind it was, and I do tend to agree with this, that if you are from a disadvantaged background, you could argue that it's actually a greater effort to manage to get a set of results which might just be under the threshold for university than a pupil or a young person from a better background.
Well, Patrick McGuire, what do you make of this idea?
I think positive action, positive discrimination, as it was once called, is always going to be controversial. But personally, it tends always to work in the areas where it's been used, and therefore, while I can see this is a controversial matter, like the gentleman that asked the question and then I think answered it, frankly, perfectly. I'd agree entirely with what you said, that on balance, these are issues, there's clearly a problem, and it's incumbent upon us in society when an issue like this presents itself as obviously a problem to try and find a solution. And this is something we must therefore look at.
But you can see the can of worms that would be opened, can't you? I mean, what happens? There would have to be a threshold. What happens if you're a student in 5th year at school, you know, who gets the same results as someone who comes from a family who earns £200 a year less than you, and that takes you over the threshold? They've got the same results, they get into university, you don't.
But the flip side to that, however, is to suggest, and are we really saying this? Are we really saying that children from poorer backgrounds are less intelligent, are less capable of being tomorrow's professionals, contributing in terms of taxes? There's absolutely no way in the world there can be a grain of truth in that. So if this is going to be a way of resolving this, then I am all for looking at it and trying to find a way through.
Well, what do you think of this idea, Gil Patterson? As I say, it's not actually Scottish Government policy, but it is going to be considered.
Again, I need to talk about my own experience. Where I was born and raised, nobody went to university at all. I didn't know anybody. I don't know anyone. I would love to have gone to art school. It's something I really love to do, still like to do it. Now that I've had my life experience, I would do exactly what I haven't missed anything, so in real terms, because I wouldn't change a single thing that I've achieved. If I had gone to art school, maybe I would have been duff at that, so who knows. I still love art, so I'm not speaking about what I've missed here, I'm talking about the opportunities for people. It definitely is more difficult for people who are in poor circumstances, living in poverty, bad backgrounds, and in the locality, etc. There are barriers set up. We need to knock them down. I'm pleased.
But what about the specific idea?
Yeah, I'm pleased. I was just coming on to that. I'm really pleased that the First Minister has reacted to this immediately, and she has said that she has accepted all the recommendations of setting up a commission to look into the very points that were made. You know, how does it impact across the board?
Sorry, she has not said she will implement this, has she?
No, she said She said that
she said she'd have a look at it.
She said that she's accepted all the recommendations and she's setting up a commission to look into it. That's exactly what she said.
Sorry, obviously she's not here to speak for herself.
No, of course not.
I don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Nicola Sturgeon actually said we are going to implement this recommendation to have people have lesser qualifications to come from poor background.
She's accepted all the recommendations that have been made to forward it onto Commission, and they're going to look into how we can implement it, is the kind of words.
Let's hear from the lady there.
Why, instead of lowering the entry requirements to university, why can't we fix the problem directly and put more funding into the education system so we all get the same standard?
Okay, thank you for that.
I'll answer that one if you want.
Well, Drew Smith, what's your view on this? And what's your view on what the ladies there has just said? And indeed on the fact that in England they have a much better record at getting people from poor backgrounds through into higher education than we do. And they don't have any system to give privileges to people from poor backgrounds.
If I begin with the point that was just made in the audience there around funding, it is the case that the funding for education and training as a whole over the piece in the last few years in Scotland has been cut by 10%. So there is a funding issue. Everyone recognises that there's a funding issue. There's an issue when you remove classroom assistants. There's an issue when
I'm sorry, but we have got quite a few questions to get through. I want to address this specific question about should people from poor backgrounds have different criteria for getting into university?
Well, they already have different circumstances, so the criteria should reflect the circumstances that people have. What I want to get away from is and I think there will be agreement around this, is we can't keep looking at the life chances of our kids and say at a particular point in time, if you meet this criteria, then your life chances will be greatly enhanced by someone else who just missed out. That's your point about thresholds. What you need is a commitment to lifelong learning, which means you put in the funding at the very earliest years and you give people a chance again and again and again to reach education, to reach their educational ambition.
I don't quite understand. Are you saying you're against lowering the standards
I'm not against
for particular groups of people?
I'm not against it at all, as long as it is part of a mix, which is what the Commission has proposed. You know, it's not a Commission that's come forward and said this is the one thing we need to do. You need to look at the broad range of reasons why.
So you are in favour of this?
Yeah, I absolutely think we should take it as part of the mix, but it's got to be part of a mix, Gordon, because the point that you make, and we keep patting ourselves in the back about how progressive we are in Scotland, in the rest of the UK, kids from disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to get to university than they are in Scotland.
But they don't have this system
are the most indebted.
Proposed here.
And that's why it's part of a broad mix.
But they don't have it. It is not the case in England that if you come from a poor family, that there's a lower threshold for you to get into university. That's not the case in England.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that this is not the one answer to it. It can only be part of a package of measures, which is investment in kids from their earliest years and is investment in supporting them through their studies. We've got a system where we we leave our students in Scotland the most indebted than they are anywhere in the UK. That's why people drop out of university. So you can make adjustments to how they get in. But the reasons they drop out remain the same. The outcomes overall will not change.
Zara Kitson, what do you think of this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely education should be accessible to all, and we need equality of opportunity, and we don't have that at the moment in Scotland for a number of reasons, because there are barriers to people entering the education system at all levels, not just at university level. So where there are barriers, we absolutely need to.
But what about this specific idea that the question is about?
Specific idea. So, I mean, I think it's not. I don't think we should be talking about in terms of lowering standards. I think that's the wrong way to approach it. As somebody, I mean, I'm from a family of minors on both sides, and I was first in my family to go to university, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without the education system that we have of free education and support in Scotland. But there is a point there that already, in terms of when universities are deciding upon which students to accept into their courses, your situation is taken into account if you're from a lower income background. So that already is taken into consideration when you're applying for university places. So if we're widening that, and it's also about looking at the specific grades, and if those grades have come about because of a particular set of circumstances, if you've got a young person who's maybe got caring responsibilities as a young carer, or is facing drug and alcohol addiction problems in the family, or other barriers that have meant that they've not been able to reach their full capacity during their term at high school, then absolutely, of course, that should be brought into the decision-making.
What would you say, should this be implemented, to the person of the same age who lives along the road from this hypothetical person you're talking about, who has exactly the same academic qualifications, but is told, sorry, you can't go to university, you're not poor enough?
that it's about ensuring that we have equal access to education for all, and I think most
But
people
that isn't
agree that
equal
that's
access
something
to
that we should.
education for all.
But it is, because we have to minimise the inequality where it exists. So if this is a measure to do that, then we need to look at that.
Gordon, I think it's really important to recognise that the system as it exists just now of just assessing on grades that people get at a particular point in their school career doesn't lead to fairness. There are already people who miss out, and what you need to have is a system that gives people that lifelong opportunity to access learning again and again, and that means investment. It means investment in things like colleges as well as universities too.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that this policy, if anything, has quite a defeatist attitude, and that it says that rather than perhaps putting more funding in to make sure that the people from more disadvantaged backgrounds have access to good schooling, it's simply saying the level is good, we'll have to open up barriers another way. I think the emphasis instead should be in ensuring that everyone has access to a good standard of schooling so that this doesn't have to be a problem.
Okay, and the young man along there. Yes, sir.
Obviously, the idea here is to get, as Zara said, is that for equality of opportunity. But my question is, how are the government going to make sure, if they do implement this, that this is not actually an advantage for people with different criteria, and it might create a whole new problem entirely?
All right, thank you for that. And there's a lady at the front there.
I wanted to say that the Scottish Government have introduced a £150 million educational attainment fund to bridge the attainment gap. And the other thing to remember is that our university education, unlike the south of the border, is free, which we should never take for granted.
All right, Carol Thornton, you haven't had a chance to have your say in this, have you?
Well, I think I came from a background in a school which is already, part of programmes working with universities that, gives you reduced grades for access. And I was lucky I, didn't need it as a result, but there were others who did. But I think really, the points that were made, particularly by those who are from Bearsden Academy, were really quite good. How do you ensure fairness? How do you ensure it's done well? And actually, I think we've got to go to the root. There are still schools in Scotland that don't offer a full curriculum. If you go to some schools in Scotland and you say, I want to be a doctor, they have to go, I'm sorry, we don't actually offer the full range of subjects for you to take as a pupil to get to go to university to do that. We also have cuts to colleges, which is a route that a lot of people from deprived backgrounds have taken and continue to take, to go to college first, to build up a specialist qualification, and then to go into university in the second and third year to get a degree.
I do want to move on. So, this proposal is for a form of, as Patrick McGuire put it, positive discrimination. I'm interested in knowing whether you think that's a good thing or an undesirable thing.
I think it's putting your hands up and saying we've given up on making schools better in poorer areas.
All right, you're against it. Alan Carroll, very briefly, if you would, do you think it's a good or bad thing?
Yeah, overall, on balance,
Alan Carroll asked the question.
I think it's a good thing. However, I do appreciate this is a real hornet's nest. I've heard quite a few contributors saying this afternoon, if we could get equality of education in Scotland, and if we could get schools to give people equal access. Pupils in Scottish schools do get equal access. What denies them the opportunities isn't the lack of education, it's the deprived backgrounds they come from, and their reaction to education.
Okay, so on balance, you think this might be...
Overall, I'm in favour of it.
Okay, let's move on. We have a question from Andrew Cruikshank.
Recent research has revealed that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere grew more in the past 12 months than at any time in the past 56 years. In light of this, do the panel think that the Scottish Government's desire to increase air travel by reducing air passenger duty is irresponsible? If we want to boost tourism, should we not be investing in better public transport and broadband?
Well, let's try to focus on the air passenger duty. Should that be reduced, do you think? Patrick McGuire.
I mean, like me, I'm sure many people in the audience have experienced that situation where you go online, you look to book a holiday or a flight, and you wonder, why in God's name is it so much more expensive to fly from Scotland? And I'm sure, like me, on occasion, that has led you to fly from Newcastle, Manchester, or wherever. We've been there, we've experienced it, and that's why I've no doubt that when the SNP's brightest and best came up with this policy, and they thought it was going to be popular, and they thought it was going to be good politics, that that's why they put it forward. Now, Gil, I've agreed with you a couple of times today, but on this one, I'm afraid we are on absolutely polar opposite sides, no pun intended, because what those brightest and best completely and utterly overlooked is the fact that if the referendum did anything, it stoked the fire of a level of political engagement in Scotland that is utterly unsurpassed elsewhere in the world. We are now all political animals, and what that political engagement has created, as I said earlier, is an absolute consensus around progressive taxation, redistribution, and ensuring that we look after our poorest in society through proper, fair taxes. And what this does is get it completely and utterly wrong. Because, and this is a crucial point, only 50%...
I do want to get another question. Zara Kitson, I'll take a wild guess here and say the Greens are against this.
Your wild guess is right, Gordon. I mean, it's a backward step. It's a very regressive move, both in terms of obviously the environmental impacts that are kind of dangerous to us all, and a complete step back when we have a government that's apparently mouthing that they are taking climate change seriously and taking steps towards that. Well, this goes absolutely against that. But in terms of the element of it, I mean, it's putting money in the pockets of polluting industry and wealthy frequent flyers. That's not a progressive tax. We should be ensuring that the tax is still there on air passenger duty and investing that, as the man says, in things that will actually promote and increase tourism. So domestic travel, investing in our better train services and bus services, investing in accessible broadband, investing in a skilled workforce. That's what we need to be using the passenger duty tax for, not cutting it.
Drew Smith, briefly, if you will.
I think it's just a very strange thing to have as a priority. Common sense tells you that if it had its desired effect, which is to lead to more air travel, then that has a climate impact. Why would we want to use the tax system to promote that? And common sense tells you that it will be regressive, in the people who will benefit most will be the people who are most able to pay. People with least will get very little from this policy, and it will cost a fortune. Why on earth would we choose to do this?
You're a bunch of hypocrites, is the...
No, not at all. The simple fact is that most folk in Scotland have to travel twice by plane. They travel from here, they go to London, then they fly somewhere else. The level of direct flights here is completely ridiculous if you can consider somewhere like Iceland or somewhere tiny population, somewhere like Dublin, smaller population than us, they have direct flights. What's happening?
Yes, but the accusation against you is you make a great song and dance about wanting to reduce carbon emissions, and then you do something which will directly lead to an increase in carbon.
Well, obviously, if you can actually do that very thing by having a direct flight rather than two flights and two costs. It's not the airlines that will benefit, it's the public here. And the other thing is the importance of tourism to Scotland the economy is enormous.
Okay,
and,
all right. Look, Kyle
all the research tells you that
again, briefly, because I do want to take
too.
another question.
I think I would probably unsurprisingly support reductions in taxation on consumers, on business. However, I think we need to look at how we do it in a way that is balanced in the budget to make sure that we're not spending money on this, in a way that would impact other ways more disproportionately. We actually are looking at the idea of a departure tax, which again encourages that direct flight, continues to have some sort of taxation on it. But at the end of the day, people are going to fly. If someone from America wants to come here, or China, or Russia wants to come here, a train and public transport is an option. People are going to fly. So let's try and encourage it and boost Scotland's economy, because if we're going to fly somewhere, let's try and encourage them to fly to Scotland.
Gordon, Gil said that most people in Scotland have to take two flights, but here's a more stark fact. Only 50% of Scottish people ever get in aeroplanes, and we know that is not the poorest people that do that. It's the richest people.
I'm sorry to rush you all along, but I did want to take a final question, which comes from Malia.
Come on, give me a clap. You were about to. Thank you.
You've made his day now. Let's have a question from Malia.
Can we trust Britain to withdraw its troops completely from Syria?
Can we trust Putin to withdraw his troops completely from Syria? Drew Smith, this was the rather surprise announcement from what surprised most people who weren't Putin, that he said he would withdraw a lot of his forces from Syria.
I think the brutal reality is, we can't just simply trust President Putin that because he says something that is will happen. I think it will have to be measured against an independent analysis of what's actually going on there. I think we're long past the point with President Putin where we take everything that he says at face value, but it does still leave us with a whole number of questions which I don't know if others on the panel will have, but I certainly don't have the answers to as to what we do in Syria, because the answer can't be a vacuum. I don't think the answer is either relying on the Russians doing something or not relying on the Russians doing something. We do need to come to a global solution for the people on the ground there, which at the end of the day is one of the things that's driving a crisis that we're seeing on Europe's shores. And I think we need to really focus on the people who are the victims of what's occurred.
Well, Patrick McGuire, Drew Smith talked there about a vacuum. I suppose what President Putin would say was that his intervention helped to avert that, and he claims now he is withdrawing his forces in order to encourage peace talks. And his question, I suppose, to the West would be, sorry, what have you done that was a better idea?
Well, that's absolutely what President Putin's saying, but let's face it, we all have to be absolutely cynical about everything that man says. You know, his actions and the actions of Russia in relation to this crisis is nothing to do with terrorism, it's nothing to do with the humanitarian crisis, it's to do with his vision of Russia and where Russia should be in the world stage. Part of that is the annexation of Crimea, and part of that is getting a foothold in Europe. Putin can point fingers at the West, and actually rightly so, in terms of how we've handled the humanitarian crisis, and particularly Britain, where I take it as a matter of national embarrassment that it took pictures of a dying child on a beach to embarrass the Prime Minister into saying, OK, we'll take 10,000 refugees over 5 years. Germany's shown us the way. Their doors should be open, and every single person affected by this should be welcomed into every country across Europe.
It's not that I don't want to talk about the refugee issue, but the question is very specifically about what's happening in Syria. Kyle Thornton.
Yeah, I think answering the question, can we trust Putin? Absolutely not. I think I would agree with Patrick when he says it's about Russia and Russia's idea of where it is in the world. It's also about, trying to distract, people in Russia in the domestic scene because their economy, is in real crisis. They are.
But again, how would you reply to my hypothetical question? I was playing devil's advocate. Is that what the Russians would say was, look, Syria's a mess. We agree on that. We've tried to do something to tilt the balance so that we can have meaningful peace talks. What have you lot in the West done? You can condemn me all you like, but what have you actually done?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the West, the West has taken action in terms of airstrikes, in terms of peace talks as well. But I think if there was an easy solution to this crisis, I think we would have already come upon it. But I think what we need to do, very clearly, is to encourage all of those around the table, who are interested. But what Putin has also done, let's not forget, is keep Bashar al-Assad in office, continuing in Syria, where it's very clear he's committed, abuses, to people in terms of chemical and biological weapons. And we certainly cannot let, Bashar al-Assad continue in office, and that's sadly what Putin's actions has done. They've let him stay in office in Syria and prolonged a civil war.
We've got a few hands up from the audience.
What I don't understand is how our government continues to talk peace talks with people like Putin and attempt to make humanitarian deals with countries like Saudi Arabia, who have horrific records of human rights, when we're talking about an issue as serious as Syria. Why are we even including Putin in the debate at all? Yes, he wants to get rid of, he's kept Assad in power, which is a bad thing. But look what happened in Libya when we could get Gaddafi out of the situation. It made things worse. We can't keep repeating our mistakes.
Thank you for that. There's a young gentleman at the front there.
I think it's also worth pointing out as well, as much as Putin has said he was going to withdraw most of the military, as far as I'm aware, he's still carrying on with some aerial bombardment campaign. As much as he would like to claim that that's about bombarding IS targets, it's been found so far it's been innocent civilians that are still paying most of the burden for that and will still continue to do so.
Okay, Gil Patterson, what do you make of what Mr. Putin has done? But also, what do you make of what the Western powers have done? And the hypothetical, again, the devil's advocate point I'm making is what exactly is the basis we have for criticising?
Well, I don't think we have any basis, because I don't think it's a good idea to bomb people in the first place in these situations. I think we would be far better to utilise the people on the ground who are doing the business properly and fighting Daesh properly, and ISIS, and that's the Kurdish military. They're doing a good job, and they're doing it, they're doing it face to face rather than from using bombs. It's indiscriminate. I think it was the wrong thing to do in the first place, but I'm pleased.
Sorry, I think even the most devoted Kurdish Peshmerga fighter would accept that the military gains that they've made are only possible because they are supported by American airstrikes.
Yes, but the carnage that's also been caused by indiscriminate bombing also has got to weigh on everybody's shoulders. And the other thing that's happened with the Kurdish people, the Kurdish military, is that they haven't been equipped properly. They've been getting third-rate equipment instead of the top up-to-date equipment because of the Turkish situation. So you need to take it all on the round. And I would have preferred much more if they supported the people on the ground. But it is good that progress has been making. This talk started on Monday, peace talks. And, let's hope that there's progress, because war and continuing of war, fighting, there's never a settlement. When you start talking in a political sense, that's the only way that this is going to stop. There's got to be a political solution rather than war.
Zara Kitson.
Yeah, I think it's very important that the West, and specifically the UK, draws lessons from the past. We have a tendency to make situations worse, and I think that it's important actually with this kind of situation that we take a conscious approach and a humanitarian approach where we can. Through invading Iraq illegally, we helped to create ISIS, and this, this has a knock-on effect in terms of the wider geopolitical situation that we now find ourselves in. And I think it is important, actually, Gordon. I know that you don't want to go back to the humanitarian bit about the refugee bit, but I think where it's not clear what we can do, I think where it is clear what we can do, which is absolutely provide a safe place for people seeking asylum and refuge to come and stay in Europe. We absolutely must be pushing for that, rather than defer or the kind of detract from the issue and the things that we can do by talking about what others aren't doing or are doing in terms of Putin. I think that we need to...
Are you saying that you don't think Britain or France or the United States should play any role in the Syrian conflict?
No, I'm not.
Other than to make refugees welcome?
No, I'm not saying that, but I think that the role that we need to take needs to be driven by the right motivation, and that should have humanitarian values and principles absolutely at its core, and I'm not convinced that that's on the basis that we always act in these situations. And we have a situation at the moment where the European leaders are having a pushback to prevent people seeking refuge and asylum in Europe and sending them back to Turkey. Now, in Turkey, it's not, there's not a safe situation for all people seeking refuge to go, particularly...
We are running out of time, and again I want to try to stick to this question about Putin and what should happen in Syria. The young man at the front there.
Yeah, I think that we shouldn't be criticising Putin at all, because we're basically doing the same thing that he's doing, like the same thing.
What do you mean, bombing?
Yeah, bombing. Like Turkey have taken like 1 million refugees, and we've not really scratched that at all. So I don't think we should be criticising anyone.
At least Putin's got some sort of exit strategy. We don't have an exit strategy in this conflict, none whatever.
Right, there was someone at the front here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry to veer off Putin, but since Turkey's mentioned, I think it's very important to point out that this supposed deal that's going to be done between Turkey and the EU is a total farce, because it's not going to stop the flow of refugees into Europe, and it's making a deal with the President of Turkey, a man who just yesterday said that journalists are the equivalent of terrorists. So given that he said that, why are we giving any succour and comfort to Turkey until he's thrown from office?
Okay, thank you for that. Well, Drew Smith, I know everyone is concerned about the refugee situation, but could you address this particular thing about Putin and what Britain, France, America could or should be doing in Syria that we're not doing?
I generally don't have the answers. I think we need to face up to, in Britain and in the West more generally. Someone in the audience said we needed to not repeat the mistakes of the past. And I think that's a perfectly obvious and fair point. But where that has led us to is paralysis, where we don't know what to do. And that leaves a vacuum for others to act. And I actually have some sympathy with the case that Zara was making, that in those circumstances where you really don't know what you can usefully do, then you should concentrate on the most immediate thing, which is the humanitarian crisis.
All right,
everyone accepts the answer can't be to move people around the world to different countries,
Okay,
but where we have
thanks
people
for
at our
that.
borders... We should
And my apologies to people who've got their hands up, but